In this episode, I give you 6 questions to answer for a great story. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And share this episode with a friend if you'd be so kind. My name is GM Smudge, and welcome to the Smudgecast. What's up, everyone, whenever or wherever you are, and I want to dive deeper into storytelling as a whole for our games just a little bit more than episode 1, when I provided kind of like my story rules, so to speak, about how to storytell in D&D. But I want to give a little bit more clarity in practice with writing a story in D&D as a player and GM, and I am a firm believer in objectivity in storytelling. I think art is 99.9% subjective, but with stories, I do believe there are strong guidelines, healthy frameworks that pique the interest or pique the engagement and the emotions of an audience in a particular way. And if we don't partake in certain, we'll call them like pragmatic frameworks in storytelling, even in D&D, I think we will miss out on great stories and memories of those stories that will last us a lifetime. So, once again, what is a story? A story is watching a character or a group of characters make decisions in the face of an obstacle. What they do, their actions, is what produces a progressing story. And writing a fantastic story is about writing in the frame of questions. And now I'm currently learning this a lot from someone named Glenn Gears. He's a film and screenwriter who has a very specific way of going about this, and not just writing a story, but writing a good story, a captivating story. And it's about answering 6+ questions that he asks about. And again, this is nothing crazy or it's nothing trademarked. They're just simple, smart questions to process before and during your game as a player and GM. And if you can answer these 6 questions, then your story will more likely be great. Now, I'm going to take them and make sense of them a little bit more for us from a D&D game sense, but trust me, if you spend 30 minutes truly mapping this out for your games, GMs, this will provide you a clear roadmap for your stories, and same thing for you players, which will make sense as well. But see, here's what's true. Your story has to start somewhere. And I had a campaign that began with an idea that I wanted my players to have lost their memories and be trapped on a ship. And it's a super simple concept that I had and that I mapped out with all that information. But it was truly interesting when I started to kind of like take that thought and really unpack it within these specific questions as well. But that story at least started somewhere for me. It started at one point, and once you at least have some sort of theme, emotion, concept, or idea, then it's about asking questions to unpack said idea so that it's a full-fledged story that your group can enjoy. And again, I just bring that up because I think sometimes we can get scared or intimidated by the things of writing a story as a GM or unpacking the different world situations as a player. And it's truly, it's something that, maybe we are afraid about in moments, but it's something that we can come to and really enjoy and have a lot of fun with. But again, it starts somewhere. It starts with an idea of sorts, which again, back to our definition of story and that example kind of I just gave, it was important for me to provide an obstacle, this specific obstacle for the players, and what came was a central game that was a mutual goal between all of the players and their characters, which was, we need to get off this ship and get our memories back. Again, super simple, but then we now have a story. So these questions are helpful, but just know that your writing style, a simple, silly idea, or how, when, or where you write is really up to you. This is something that is helpful to learn about ourselves as a storyteller, whether a GM or a player. My session prep works best for me in short bursts, like 10 to 15 minutes a day. And my last thought in all of this, as we go into these 6 questions, if you don't have an answer to these questions, write down what comes to mind and move on. Then come back and add a little bit more and then move on. You see what I'm saying? And keep just doing this because your creativity needs to hang on and stay progressing, or else you'll never kind of figure out these questions and answer them fully. So based on all of this, kind of like a side prep and preface to what we're talking about here. But as for now, let's dive into the 6 questions to answer for a great story And so, really quick, I just want to hit all of them for you just so you know. So, here they are. Who's the story about? What do they want? Why can't they get it? What do they do about it? Why doesn't that work? And how does it end? Let's dive in. Number one, who's it about? So the players obviously are the main characters in a specific or to a specific degree, right? In an interesting way, I think it depends on your story. Your players could be the main protagonists, but maybe for a short period of time, there's an NPC that the story is revolved around, which I might argue that that's about the NPC and the players are side characters or sub characters supporting the main NPC. I think this is super interesting to think through from a story lens because the players are seeing the world through their story, right? Versus us as an audience, seeing the story through the lens of a director or a writer who is telling us who the main story is about. Who are the main characters? Well, it's the people that we're watching on the screen that have the most talking time, right? But clearly the GM has a story and the players live inside it and are the ones to see it from start to finish. But it's just interesting, I think, to ask yourself in the story you're in, is there anyone else that this story is about? Is there another NPC? What about the villain? Is there the antagonist? Is this the antagonist story at any point, right? So with 3 to maybe 8 players you have, they are seeing themselves as the main character, and it's also important to think through how does each of their goals conflict with one another, which again could be a whole huge mess, but all in all to this question specific of who's it all about? Who's the main characters here? The question is helpful to gauge not literally who the story is just about, but instead who to focus on, provide attention to, make the goals for, the actions, the conflict, who's the conflict centered around. Now, what's even better on top of answering this question is asking why. And again, it's like, so who's it all about? Well, it's my 5 players. Okay, why? Well, it's D&D, that's why. No, but like truly, why? An example of this could be like, because the players have all been in contact with the same alien creature and they've all been cut by it. So now we've taken them and built a specific story around or a specific situation around. So even as we go and we dive deeper into these questions and for better storytelling, I think better stories are only, and bad stories really, I'll say that bad stories are really only limited by the inability to answer the question why. So as we dive deeper, try to answer the question why, as you keep unpacking your story and diving deeper. But that's number 1, is who's it all about? Number 2, what do they want? Now, again, depending on who your story at large is about versus the specific quest your players are on, what are they looking for? What do they actually want? This is the classic question to identify goals, motives, and understand what the main characters want or even need, right? I think you could even play this out in your games and not know this ahead of time, but you'll need to make this a very concrete and central desire. Make it clear. But it could be complex, right? It could be swinging to the other side, extremely simple. That doesn't necessarily matter, but it needs to be central and it needs to be concrete. And out of all the questions, this question is the most expansive. All the other questions I will share are kind of limited to questions 1 and 2, right? But this question number 2, what do they want? What do the characters want is massive in scope and could be anything. A helpful tip in this, if you're a player trying to figure out what does your character want holistically, try to work it out with your GM in a way that either connects to the overall story so that you can experience maybe a simple sub-arc to the story, or that it completely connects to the main story overall, right? If you try to create, a want that is outside of your story, that's totally fine, right? Just know that it might not come up at all, and you'll need to make sure you don't force it, player. And same thing for you, GM. You need to make sure that you don't force it as well to make sense, because it honestly just might not make sense to have those goals interact with each other. So even a sub question to this, does what they want, is it going to connect to the overall main storyline? Is it a subline, or should it not connect at all? Right? So now this isn't a story just yet. Even if you answered these 2 questions, the first and second one, you've identified, who the players are, the villains, NPCs, what they want. You can now start to produce the main obstacle that comes in their way, which is a story. Number 3, why can't they get it? Why can't they get what they want? What's the obstacle in the way preventing them from getting what they want? And again, the reason why I like to say sometimes our D&D stories are not about the players, because they can actually help the NPC with their problem and be supporting to figure out the NPC's obstacle, which in the end might be taking the players on a course of their own, solving their obstacles. So they actually might be hand in hand. But the main question is, what is the obstacle in the face of what they want? Just so you know, good storytelling in D&D isn't revolved around the level of the players, honestly, at all. It shouldn't be. You might be gasping a bit. It's like, no, I need to set my challenges and stuff. It's okay, I hear what you're saying, but understand this. Obstacles could feel massive and important whether you're level 3 or level 20. It's just how you go about presenting the obstacle, which is more important. It can feel, huge and massive, and it should, but it can't feel small, and it can't feel uninteresting. It has to feel like too much. Now, understand me when I say feel like too much. You still have to allow the players to figure out how to solve this obstacle, but you need them to feel like it's going to take a ton of work, a ton of planning. It needs to be worthy of trying to solve, which means what they want needs to be worthy of wanting. So players, that's why it's really important for you to not just make a simple, revenge story, which might be great, but does it really matter? Does it matter? And talk to your GM and how it might connect to the overall story if you really want it to be. Another way of saying this is that the obstacle needs to be over their head right now. They cannot solve it right now, but they can if they fill in the blank, which is up to them, not you, GM. So don't solve the obstacle, but present one that's powerful, will take time, that's over their heads initially, and is worthy of being solved. And the players, you guys are going to be thinking this question. Well, if we don't solve this obstacle, then what, right? If we don't solve this, then the world will end, a person may die, etc. This is not only the buy-in moment of your story and for your players, but it's setting the tone for the story at large. So again, you've got who is it about, what do they want, why can't they get it, and number 4, what do they do about it, right? Once again, don't answer this question up front. Watch GMs, watch the players, listen to them, and react to what they do want to do in the face of the obstacle. This is honestly the listening stage at first for GM, picking up on the creative minds of the players. But players, this question is mainly for you. What are you going to do about it? This is mainly for you to process and answer based on what you want, why you want it, and the main obstacle that's come up. So in any story, trust me, if you've watched any story or listened to any story, players, you got to be prepared for your plans to not go perfectly. In a metagaming sense, I'm trying not to be in a metagaming sense, but in a storytelling sense, when the protagonists have solved everything the first try, I can't even think of a story that's happened without it actually, being a lie to some degree. Taking kind of like a 50,000 foot high view of stories in general, solving the problem first try, like that first try, doesn't really make for interesting stories. So here are a couple ways to treat this question, that there might be, 1,000 ways to answer it, but funnel down those ways a bit so that you can maximize your story to be the most potent story, players. And by all this, I mean, let this be a stage in your story where you receive the most info, the most understanding, who's all involved, why they're involved, unpacking anything and all things, and claim items that may support your story. I say all this again because I think what happens is that we as players don't take good responsibility of making good choices. Like, we need to think about what we might need or need more of. I don't know. Go to a library and study. I don't know, find some information there. Find some sorcerers to help understand the past and like the true past and the history of the world. Travel to a new plane or a new land for the sake of experiencing a new place that may give you some insight into what's been happening and why the obstacle is there. I would call this some sort of research stage. I know it doesn't sound like a very sexy way of putting it, but it's not about it's not about just reading a book of info. It's find people and interrogate them, break into a museum or something, or and look for an artifact that you can get an edge on, or hit up an underground fight club, where you can meet some mentors or people that can give you insight of what's been actually happening behind closed doors the past 10, 20, 30 years in the city. It's about not waiting for your GM to give you story moments, but it's about you claiming and creating opportunities for yourself and solving the obstacle in place. So take ownership here and run with it, players. Do your, do yourself some justice here and get really creative and make some cool story moments about now what do we do in the face of this obstacle. And I think that's going to start creating really, really great stories for yourself. Number 5, why doesn't that work? Right? So you've come up with some plans and you're going about it and it's might hit a wall, right? GM, you cannot make it look like you are just saying no to their plans or why their plans are not working. If it looks like you, GM, are just making it hard for the players to figure things out, then the players are going to be confused and get super pissed off. They're going to be upset, which is kind of understandable. It's hard to do that, but you have to be strategic in how and why the plans of the players don't work. Okay, so, for D&D, I think the reason things shouldn't really work should be mainly because of 2 things. Number 1, the roles of the said moments, and 2, because the plans of the players is overcome by some sort of internal or external force. But let's dive in and kind of look at both of those sides. I do think that the dice themselves, they're there to do their job. They're there to tell us what happens next in our story to some degree, while the GM is interpreting the dice a bit and speaking on behalf of what the dice has said, right? And sometimes it tells the story for us at the perfect times. I remember, there was this moment in my 3rd campaign where the players were on a ship, they were at sea, and they were in this territory of a giant kraken that I called Big Sister. And they had to be extremely quiet, and their goal was to kill the captain. And at that point, I'm the GM, and I knew this was going to happen. I was listening to them. I knew what their plans were. But their roles up front were spectacular up until the end of this whole scene. They get in. The silent battle ensues. They get to the moment where they're going to try to kill the captain, and right before they notice that he's about to scream and let out a final roar because he knew he was cornered. A couple of the other players had kind of him grappled a bit, but nobody kept his mouth shut. So there was a single grapple contest to keep his mouth shut before he screams, and the players rolled, and he screams. Their roles were horrible, and Big Sister came and destroyed the ship. Again, I bring this up because it wasn't my fault as the GM that their plan didn't work. It was a great plan, but it was up to the dice. It just solves the blame game in a way, and it keeps the players' heads leveled, truly. And it was actually really awesome. It was a really good story moment. Now, taking that and moving to the number 2, which is again about, the internal external forces that come into play that overcome the players in some way. So the players' plans, they're overcome by some sort of force, which really means that something the players didn't think through or that came up that the players didn't plan for. But don't go looking for this too hard in the players' plans, but just enough to where the story keeps, being interesting, but still not playing the blame game. I think all in all, what I'm trying to say here is that the root behind these 2 tips for this question is, GM, you can't say no to how the players want to solve the problem, but you can put fair obstacles in the way that require the players to work and maneuver around. But you gotta know when to stop pushing and know when the players have succeeded. But a healthy way to show the players that their plans didn't work revolves around them and any sort of other additional internal external force and their dice. So that's number 5. And lastly, number 6, how does it end? This is a really good question. and the best answer for all of this should probably be, I don't know. I'm sort of kidding, not kidding in a way. Yes, I think this question might be relevant for a novel or a screenplay, but potentially not for D&D, because as we know, your game could drastically change over the course of 3 months to 2 years of playing. However, let's say your game you've reached question 5, right? You've reached that question of why doesn't it work? And I think at that point you can start road mapping on how will it all end with a couple options that make sense to everything that's already happened up until then, right? It's the moment when the protagonists have lost so bad that they have the deepest level of despair, which then begins the final chapter of their story. So to this question, I say wait. Wait for the moment where you've reached all the information, all the gameplay, all the questions up until 5 have been answered and completed to when you begin to answer this question. I think a couple additional things to keep in mind here is whatever final resolution the players come up with needs to become the resolution to your story. So make that apparent to them and for them as they win, you know. Also, this is the time for any other additional subplots, sub-conflicts, any other interruption, only just the end. And in a way, it's like question 5 is, you know what, it's kind of interesting. I think question 5 is like the Avengers Infinity War, and question 6 is like Endgame. In a sense, right? There's only one more final rally to the end to solve one main problem without anything else coming up until you get to Thanos and his army and finally bringing down that evil Titan. Oh man, that was such a good movie. And then again, in all this, and then you sit back with your party, right? You finish it. How does it all end? You completed it all. You're looking around at any of those that have fallen, and you give respect to the time, the energy, and commitment that player and character has given to fighting for the story. And then, you know, maybe with a drink in your hands, you all sit around. You sit back in remembrance and how you've completed your journey, and you revel in all that's been done. Man, I've had some really good stories that have started and have ended really, really well. I've also had some stories that have started and ended really, really poorly or never really ended at all, which are really, really sad and bummers. But I think if you can take this week, I hope you can this week, you can start making a great story by answering these 6 questions, or at least starting to process how to answer these 6 questions, you know, so that we can put to practice good storytelling in our games. And as players and as GMs, taking ownership of our story here. And again, as we talk, that's going to be my heartbeat, is that it's not just on the GM and it's not just on the players and it's not just on the dice, but you've got 3 sort of groups or entities that are involved with storytelling. And it's important that we all do our best to take responsibility of that and jump in and enjoy our story and maximize it as much as we can. Now, if you're having trouble or need any support in any way, go ahead and message me at GM Smudge on Instagram. Love to be able to support you and help you and tend to your story if you're a player or a GM. And make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so that you can get notified every week with a new episode as it drops, you know, and share with your party, share with a friend. That would do so much help for me in these podcasts and on YouTube as well. And go ahead and comment below. I'm really curious which question that was talked about could be one that you're really needing an answer for and you don't have it, and why. And maybe hit me up on Instagram too. Love to be able to help you there. But then lastly, make sure to add value to your game so that your game becomes more memorable. See you later.